Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on another cloudy day here in the capital city as once again we put the topic of leadership under the spotlight. My name is Scott Challoner and I'm delighted to be joined on today's programme by Anthony Stankard. Anthony is the Managing Director of Reside Manchester, an independent estate agency in Manchester's city centre. Anthony, very well welcome to you and thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us today.
Pleasure, thank you.
It's a real pleasure having you on the air with us, Anthony, as well. Now, the purpose of this discussion is to really understand your take on leadership as a whole. So if we dive straight in and just look at that word leader in isolation, what does that word mean to you and how does it resonate?
Leader, well, I suppose in current climate that word's become all-encompassing because, you know, what our normal day-to-day, I led a team, I suppose you would say, of estate agents in a business and driving that towards profitability and customer service, what have you. But then things like COVID-19 arrive and suddenly all those big decisions you need to make, you know, land on your desk, and that's the time to step up and make what have been, you know, very difficult, very hard and personal decisions. But at the end of the day, that's my role as the leader, the managing director of a company, to make sure the company survives through a time of absolute turmoil and something that we didn't know and still probably don't know exactly how long it's going to last for.
Yeah, there's been an awful amount of pressure on leaders at the moment, hasn't there, to respond to the COVID-19 crisis and what is ultimately unprecedented territory. And we've seen that not just within businesses, but also in governments as well. For somebody working within your line of work, Anthony, how do you feel that you've adapted to this? Because I can imagine it's been an incredible challenge, not just for yourself as a leader in bringing a great deal of responsibility, but also for employees, staff members as well. I mean, that's also something to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think of our industry, residential estate agency, our whole, you know, I've spent 25 years in this business, and that time has been spent doing what I love, which is meeting the public. That's what we do all day, every day. We go into strangers' houses, we meet developers, we meet builders, surveyors, contractors, and we engage with them in close proximity, verbally and you know, physically go into properties and building sites, what have you. Then all of a sudden, you know, we couldn't do that at the end of March, and it took a lot of sitting down and thinking, and how do you run an estate agency when you can't let people into an office and you can't go and meet them? So yeah, we had to make some very alien decisions to an industry that is very touchy-feely and, you know, see how we operated going forward. So it was a huge learning curve at the end of March. And yeah, I think one of the things that we did learn, as not just as estate agents, but as human beings, is we're actually very adaptable and we will find a way. And I think we did, and we have found a way.
And that sounds incredibly encouraging. And I can imagine that it's come with the pressure of making some not necessarily difficult decisions, of course, but also having some quite tricky conversations with certain people as well, because when there's so much uncertainty during a time like this, there'll be people looking to business leaders for reassurance and just keeping the communication channels open when it's not necessarily clear what the future holds. It can be quite difficult providing that, can't it? And that can bring its own pressures as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, very early on, mid to end of March, you know, we had conversations with, I had a team of 15 people. And at the end of March, we made 4 of those people redundant. Now, that's never an easy decision to make because working in one office, you know these people well, they become friends. And I knew from experience of 2008, I think what we learned back then was invaluable now, because I was in the same industry doing the same thing. And if you acted quickly and decisively, you got through the financial crisis, and we did. We did. You know, we came out the other side, and we came out a lot stronger than when we went in. So one of the first things I said to my co-director on the third week in March was, we need to act now, and we need to make some tough calls. And we decided to lose 4 people there and then. The team came down to 11. And then shortly after, we furloughed 5, and the remainder worked from home. Now, the strategy on that was to kill the costs as quickly as we could and know how to survive. And I'm one of those, I don't like to make things complicated. The situation seemed very clear to me and very, very easy. The cost going out, I know it sounds easy when you say now, but the cost must be less than the money coming in. We know from experience that the sales market was going to die very, very quickly. The banks started to shut down products. Surveyors couldn't go out and see things, and solicitors were starting to be furloughed. So, we knew that sales transactions would dry up very quickly, and there was no way that they could recover. And that happened. We got through into the start of April, I suppose, with transactions still completing, and then that just ground to completing of the halt. It's starting to come back now because banks have reopened product, loan to values are getting better, surveyors are back doing surveys, and the machine is gradually coming back and confidence is slowly returning. However, on the lettings and the property management side, we knew that money needed to keep coming in. Tenants needed to keep paying the rent. If they paid the rent, we'd receive our management income, and that was the figure that we knew should come in, subject to 100% of rent being collected. And therefore, we cut our cloth accordingly, that costs must reflect the income we know we will make, because we don't know whether this will be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or 6 months. So those decisions were made very, very early. They were made in the third week of March. I think we got it right, because come the 18th of May, we unfurloughed all of the team and brought the rest back into the office on a 2-team basis, an A team and a B team. And that decision again was made because I thought my team can earn more money for the company and themselves being at work rather than what we could save on the government's furlough scheme. And we are now towards the end of our 4th week. And that's definitely been the case. The rental market has come through and it's certainly not back at the levels it was this time last summer, but it's not bad. And the sales market is still absolutely, completely dead. It's very, very quiet out there. But the rental and the property management side of the business, it's getting back to some sort of, you said, new normal.
And what do you think the new normal is going to sort of look like for yourselves in your industry? Are you satisfied that you are fully aware of what's expected of you, just because there's been a lot of debate about how clear government guidelines are with regards to COVID secure premises, etc.?
Yeah, I think because we were in that first phase of people going back to work, then they did issue, the gov.uk did issue very clear guidelines on how we operate. So, I must give them their due on that. Social distancing as an office, we were fortunate to have a reasonably size office, so our desks were already sort of 2 meters apart. So we removed where we had 4 desks on the floor. We took 1 out, and it became 3. So they were comfortably socially distanced. And on viewings, they issued guidelines on how my team attended viewings with the public. What we have learned is the public and ourselves adapted to the virtual viewings quite quickly. So we took a decision early on, and it was a bit of a learning curve. It probably took us about 3 weeks to get this right and get the procedure in place that worked. And that was that we would only market properties that were empty. As an estate agent, we're probably in a fortunate position to do that because we work in the city centre, Manchester city centre. Most of our product is vacant, new build, what have you. We don't cover suburbia where a normal family currently live in situ. So we were in quite a fortunate position. But what we did learn is if the property was vacant, it had its deep clean, and we produced a high quality video, then tenants still needed to move. People had given notice. People had been served notice. So they were working through that 2-month period where they would in effect be homeless because they'd handed in their notice. So, and people were still moving around. So those people needed somewhere to live. And provided you did those 3 things, an empty property with a deep clean and a quality video, they were happy to reserve them. So we continue to do that. And what we've learned, even since we've opened the office, is the general public are still quite happy to almost do the virtual viewing as their first appointment. And then if they pretty much are deciding to take the property, they will do a physical viewing. And some of them still don't even do the physical viewing. So the world has changed very, very quickly. And we are not seeing anywhere near the amount of applicants that we would traditionally have seen. So to give you some, I was looking at some figures this morning, this time last year and through the course of the last 12 months, what I call our strike ratio, i.e. how many viewings we have to conduct to do a deal, has over the past few years been around 1 in 7. So for every 7 appointments we'll do a deal, whether that be a sale or a rental. I look back over the last 4 weeks since we reopened the office, and that has become a ratio of 1 in 2. So every second person we're seeing, they're taking the unit. So it seems people are making that decision at home, online, virtually with their partner, what have you, and then almost going to the property to seal the deal. So our productivity has actually increased, astronomically, because a lot of the work's been doing at home via WhatsApp and those sort of mediums that we never used before. So it has changed dramatically, and I think that I don't see why that will change, certainly in the next 6 months. Human beings have a nature of, I think, forgetting. So, in 12 months' time, it might go back to the way it was, but certainly the online presence seems to have been, the virtual, presence seems to be a staple now of our lives. And our high street premises, we don't have people coming in anymore. They just do not want to come and sit in an office that they don't know, even though it's a controlled COVID secure environment. There's no need for them to be there. They will meet us at a property once they've almost made the decision to take the property, go in on their own and have a look round. We'll wait for them outside. They'll come and, I'll say 1 in 2 people are making that decision straight after that appointment.
And there are going to be some very interesting and difficult decisions still to be made, I think, even though we're starting to see things opening up again for sure, Anthony. And if we think about what that long-term future now holds for yourself and for Reside Manchester specifically, over the next 12 to 18 months, as we do begin to adapt to the new normal, what do you envision for the business and what do you really hope to achieve as we hopefully emerge from COVID and really look to the future?
I genuinely think we're in a time now of hunkering down and making sure that, for example, there's a second wave or this thing comes back next winter, that we're not in the panic scenario that we were in March, taking 3 weeks to make sure that everything was in place. Now, I think we've got to just make sure that those bases are covered going forward, and we know what we can do. We know how we can operate. We know we can run it from home. We know what the public expect and are willing to do and not do. So I think we've got to keep that as the basis for a business. But we are still looking to expand and grow. We have a number of developments that are under construction at the moment and will be coming to the market, and we don't see why they won't be very welcome than they would any other time. We're certainly, the interest rates we're getting early doors of inquiry levels, then these new schemes seem to be, it seems that the general public almost are quite content looking at a new block that's been built. It's brand new, no one's ever been lived in it, and there seems to be a feeling that that's almost safe and secure and warranted, whereas a second-hand property, they are definitely suffering. So we are in, again, say fortunate, but we've worked very hard to be in that position of having a number of new developments coming through in the city over the course of the next 12 months. So, we're looking to both sell and rent through those developments and grow in that market. It's just for the next few months and this year, we've just got to sort of take baby steps and make sure that the basics are covered, that income covers outgoings, basically. But I certainly think that in our world, in 12 months, i.e. spring next year from when they started, I'm hoping you'll see the rental market, I think, will have returned to normal. I think prices that are currently quite competitive will be back where they were this March. The sales market, I think, will be a little bit tougher. It's one thing to make a decision to rent somewhere for 12 months, and you're probably getting it at a few pounds cheaper than it was a couple of months ago, and it's a great brand new apartment. You're living in the city centre, and all is well, and you might this time search somewhere that has got a balcony or outside space. But if you're making a decision to buy at £300,000 in the city centre, people seem to be just making sure that they're taking a bit longer to be confident with that decision, and I think that's human nature and psyche, and that will take a little bit longer for that to come back into the market. So it'll be interesting to see where the sales world is in 12 months' time. But the rental world, we're dealing with a young, dynamic audience. Most of our tenants are 25 to 35. At that age, you just want to get on with life, don't you? So, I think the rental world will adapt and will return to normal relatively quickly, and the sales world will take a little longer.
Let's certainly see what happens with both of those sides of the business, Anthony, for sure. And, I think given how sort of informative it's been discussing these issues on the air today, I think it would be great if at some point in the next year we could catch up and have you back on the programme just to see how things are getting on in that respect and how both sides of the business are starting to recover, because it's hugely important, and we just don't know at the moment exactly what is going to happen amid all the uncertainty, and there is still a great deal of variables along the way as well, the likelihood of perhaps a second wave. So again, it would be good, I think, from a listener's perspective, just to catch up and see in the time between what exactly has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and the company provides all of that data. We have stacks and stacks of data of the residential world, so it's quite easy to compare year on year, month on month, that kind of thing. As we've just discussed, we can already see in the last 4 weeks how productivity, so although applicant and viewing levels are down sort of 75%, productivity is massively up, and volume wise not quite where we were last year by any stretch, but certainly at a level that I would have accepted quite comfortably in March. So yeah, I'd love to come back in another 6 months' time and say, look, this is what we thought would happen, and actually, this is what has happened, and see where we are. Don't get me wrong, I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think there's a furlough issue that's yet to be resolved in the general working population. I can see trouble when those schemes end in July, August, September, and where companies are in certain sectors. Our market, Manchester city centre, we have a huge hospitality retail environment. Where will those industries be in 3-4 months' time? Professional services for the sort of higher end of the market. Personally, I think that market will probably be okay, but marketing, advertising, all of those industries that we see buyers and tenants coming from, I don't think we're quite out of the woods yet, even though the COVID stats are getting better and getting to where they're more manageable, that the government want tailing off. I think we've still got an economic issue ahead of us personally. So it'll be interesting to see where that takes us over the next 6 months.
It certainly will be, and it would be my pleasure, of course, to have you back on the programme later on down the line, Anthony, to discuss just that. I've got to say, it's a shame we're just about out of time today, otherwise we could talk about it long into the afternoon, I'm sure. But do take care in the meantime, Anthony, and do stay safe with all still going on, because as exactly you've said, we are not out of the woods with this yet at all.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks very much for that.
That was Anthony Stankard speaking, the Managing Director of Reside Manchester. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with England's 1966 Football World Cup hero, Sir Geoff Hurst. During his professional career, Sir Geoff scored over 200 league goals for the likes of West Ham United and Stoke City, but most notably, he remains the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in the final of a World Cup competition after his treble in England's 4-2 victory over West Germany at the old Wembley Stadium 54 long years ago now. And I hope you enjoy listening just as much as Jonathan enjoyed speaking with Sir Geoff. That's coming up next.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, realise that I did score nothing for Essex, for my only game for Essex first team, when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Geoff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, at football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over the years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach, as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that, of that calibre, can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life. And that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably. Well, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham, and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved and what a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bob Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, what I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era, I was involved for 6 or 7 years. It was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at a time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in your organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learned over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team, or certainly in the squad, and surprisingly they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it only a few games before. I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in a game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Aaron. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, if maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot, and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he moved 1 or 2 players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players and great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited to just have a glance round,
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Oh, yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you with. It won't be too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, in most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was the usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him. So I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
And you've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest that I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
Well, it's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitch, people must realise that has an influence. how you react and behave to situations on and off the field, surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think, particularly on the field or the sidelines, that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to. Their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today. Easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson is just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the like of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, well, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
That's a good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with and I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that, so many, and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody, and going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit. Getting on with each other lasted for a long time, and I wouldn't. When you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else; they were all outstanding, and I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was, and I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Very good nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.